Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to teach you the 3 simple rules that govern how turn-taking works in conversation. It may seem mysterious, but believe it or not, there's only 3 rules that govern how it works. I'm Bruce Lambert from HowCommunicationWorks.com. Let's get started. So if you ever found yourself in a situation where you walk into a room or you walk up to a group of people, they're in a circle having a conversation, you're on the outside looking in. You want to join this conversation, but you're not sure how. How can you join without interrupting? How can you join without being rude? It's a puzzle. Or a second situation, you're having a conversation with a friend or a colleague, it's just one-on-one, and suddenly both of you stop talking. It's the dreaded conversational lull. What happens next? Who should talk next? If this doesn't only happen when only 2 people are talking, it can also happen when 2 or 3 or 4 people are talking. One person stops, and then how do we know who should speak next? It's not always a problem. In fact, most of the time it's not. Most of the time the system works perfectly. But when it breaks down, we notice that there is a set of rules here, but we just don't know what those rules are. So in this video, I want to explain to you the 3 simple rules of conversation. In order to understand these 3 simple rules about how conversation, how turn-taking in conversation works, you have to understand a basic concept in the social science of communication, and that is the concept of the floor. Now, you've heard this expression before. Who has the floor? I want the floor. Especially if you have been in a lot of government meetings or any kind of your condo board association meetings or homeowners association board meetings or school board meetings, you'll know that there's a way to allocate access to the floor. That is, who gets the right to speak. The floor is nothing more than the right to speak. The person who's speaking has the floor, and then they yield the floor and they give the floor to someone else. So the social scientists call these procedures floor allocation mechanisms. How do we allocate access to the floor? How can we decide who gets to talk when, so that we're not all talking at the same time? The amazing thing about conversation, if you tape record it and then transcribe it, there's a few amazing things. One is that there's a little bit of overlapping talking, but it's very, very, very brief, and it's relatively rare. What happens most of the time is one person stops talking and the other person starts talking, and the gap is tiny, just fractions of a second. How do we possibly do this? If you've ever tried to dance with somebody or coordinate any other activity, even just walk around the kitchen at the same time, you bump into each other all the time. So how is it we manage to coordinate conversational turns in fractions of a second? So as soon as one person stops talking, the other person starts talking with no overlap and only a fraction of a second gap. It's an amazing achievement, and I'll tell you briefly, or I'll tell you in a minute how it works. But before we talk about conversational mechanisms for allocating the floor, let's think about formal mechanisms for allocating the floor. Because in conversation, what we have is an informal mechanism for allocating the floor, for allocating the right to speak. But before we look into that, it's easier if we start with formal floor allocation mechanisms. And so the most famous and obvious one is if you've ever been in a governmental type group or a board situation, like I said, a school board or a condo board or homeowners association or Model UN, or if you've watched Congress on C-SPAN, you know that there are formal mechanisms for giving people turns at talk, for giving them the right to speak, for giving them the floor. And if you've ever been in one of these groups, you may have had to learn something called Robert's Rules of Order. So Robert's Rules of Order are a set of rules for running meetings, and one of the main things that they do is establish how you get the floor. So there are rules, the person speaking has the floor until they yield the floor. The chair of the meeting has the opportunity to give people the floor. Often there are time limits. You can have the floor, like if you watch Congress speak during a committee meeting, each member of a committee might have 3 minutes or 7 minutes or 9 minutes, or the chair of the committee from a particular party might have 20 minutes, which he can allocate to members of his party, and each of them gets 5 minutes or something like that. Also, if you think about presidential debates are highly structured in terms of who has the right to the floor, because in a debate, both candidates want to talk all the time, and they could if you let them. So there's long in advance, the 2 candidates agree with one another about my candidate will speak first, and then your candidate have a rebuttal, and then there'll be a response, and each of those will be 2 minutes long, and then there'll be a 5-minute closing statement, and every single aspect of who has the right to speak is decided in advance. So those are all examples of formal mechanisms for allocating the floor, for giving people the right to speak. But that's not what happens in conversation. So when you bump into a friend at a restaurant or a bar or on the street, you don't say, oh, I'm going to make an opening statement of 2 minutes, and then you're going to have 1 minute to respond, and then I'll have 1 minute to reply. It doesn't work like that. And yet, for the vast majority of the time, floor allocation in conversation isn't a problem. Most of us get to speak when we want. Turn taking normally flows easily and naturally. So how is it that that happens? In conversation, there are only 3 basic rules that determine who will speak, that govern all of turn taking. So the first of these rules is speaker selects next. So the person who has the floor in the conversation can select the next speaker. It's just one of the rights in normal, informal conversation that comes with having the floor. If you have the floor in a normal conversation, so I can be talking in the conversation. At the end, I can say, "What do you think, Bob?" And then I give the floor to Bob. So as a speaker, I can yield, just like in Congress, when the chair of the meeting can yield the floor to a colleague. In ordinary conversation, you can say, what do you think, Kimberly? And that person can have the floor. So speaker selects next. That's the first rule that governs floor allocation in informal conversation. The second rule is other self-selects. The other person self-selects. So you're speaking, or the other person, somebody else is speaking, and they get done with their turn at talk, and they don't select the next speaker. They don't end their turn by saying, "Hey, Bill, what do you think?" They just stop talking. So then everyone's sitting there, no one's talking. So anyone in the group can self-select. So you can grab the floor for yourself as long as no one else is talking. So that's the second rule. So now we have 2 rules for floor allocation in conversation. The first is speaker selects the next. The second is anyone else can self-select. As long as there's a pause and a silence, you can self-select. And the silence can be very short, and you can jump in. So as soon as there's a silence, anyone can self-select. And the third is that the speaker continues. So the speaker can stop talking. You're sort of done with your turn. You wait for someone else to talk. No one else talks, so you keep talking. So this is it, believe it or not. These are the only 3 rules that govern conversation. Speaker selects next, other self-select, or speaker continues. And all turn taking in informal conversation is governed by these 3 rules. It's an amazing thing. I think I haven't yet explained, I'm going to leave it to another video, how we coordinate the micro coordination of our timing. How is it that one person can stop speaking and another person can start speaking with no overlap and only fractions of a second in between? That's a mystery I'll get to in one of the next videos. It's an amazing thing. See if you can figure it out. But for now, I just wanted to say the main puzzle that we have to solve in conversation in turn taking is allocation of the floor. Unlike in debates or in Congress, where there's a formal mechanism for allocating the floor, like Robert's Rules of Order, in ordinary conversation, there are 3 informal rules, and you probably didn't even know them until I told them to you. They are the speaker self-selects, the speaker selects the next, anyone else can self-select, or the speaker can continue talking. So that's it. Now you know something about how ordinary conversation works, and if you ever come up to a group of people speaking, unless the speaker selects you to speak next and you're looking to get in on the conversation, you have to wait for a silence and then self-select. And that's a perfectly valid way to enter a conversation that's already going on. So I hope you enjoyed this little tidbit of interesting factoids about how conversation works. Tune in next time and I'll talk about how we coordinate turn taking with such tiny pauses between turns. If this sort of video interests you, please consider pressing the like button over here, the subscribe button over here. And if you're really interested in this stuff, there are longer form written articles about communication at howcommunicationworks.com. I hope you'll consider giving us a visit over there. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you next time.